Thank you all for joining today. I'm Jared Johnston here from Ultima. I'm one of the solutions architects here, and we're here to talk to you about securing your email services with Microsoft, specifically your Office 365 email services. And yeah, we'll get started. Just by way of agenda, if you can just jump forward a slide there, Max. There's not a lot to cover today in terms of the agenda, but we have a short introduction from myself. We'll then pass over to our guests here from Mimecast, and then we'll have a bit of a Q&A at the end. So if you do have any questions during the course of the presentation, please use the tools with your GoToWebinar. There'll be a questions section. You can just put your questions in there. And when we get to that time at the end, we'll try and cover those off. If there are anything that we can't cover immediately, or if we get inundated with questions, we'll take them offline. But we'll have a short time at the end there for Q&A. Okay, in terms of Ultima, I think probably most of you will know who we are, so I won't spend a lot of time talking about what we do. But for those of you who are new to Ultima, we are a Microsoft Gold partner, a Mimecast Premier partner, amongst many others, but we are an independent solution provider, and we've been around for a long time. I think it's 27 years now, I believe, but we've been consulting on sort of Microsoft. They're probably our largest partner. We've been consulting on their services for many years now, and specifically email. And one of the things we pride ourselves on is the fact that we are independent. We don't just sell solutions to make money. We recommend solutions only that we really believe in and things that we think are going to provide value. And that's really where Mimecast comes in. And so, yeah, we're here to talk to you today about Mimecast. And probably, I guess the question will be, why Mimecast? Probably the three key pillars of Mimecast solutions that I always talk about with our customers are email security, resilience, and backup. And I'm sure we're going to cover those off today, but probably one of the key things about email, and I've been working with email services now for well over 15 years. What we've seen is that there's been a huge proliferation of email. It's business critical. Business lives and breathes on email, and I'm sure you all know that now. And what we've seen probably over the last 10 years or so is lots of other forms of communication that are being adopted, whether that's Link or Skype for Business, Teams now, and Slack and WhatsApp, Zoom, all manner of different methods of communication for employees to collaborate on. And we've even heard of the prediction of the death of email. But I think one thing is absolutely clear, is that email usage in this time, it hasn't shrunk, but it's increased. And so it's important that we recognize that email is here to stay. And so we can't afford to stop being vigilant in this area. We've kind of been on this journey for a number of years now, where we've been moving our email services into the cloud. And one of the dangers, I think, that's come with that transition is that we can unwittingly believe that because we are in the cloud and we're letting Microsoft handle it, that we are safe and secure, because our great cloud giant, Microsoft and Google or whoever else, they're going to make sure that we're protected. But I think the reality is that it's altogether different. And I'm not going to take pot shots at Microsoft today. They provide excellent email services, and we absolutely recommend the use of Office 365. But when we're talking about securing our email service, quite frankly, I think the offering that we get with Office 365 isn't good enough. And so the three things that that really make Mimecast stand out are the email security. Now some of you may say, well, we've got advanced threat protection, we've got E5, we've got you know, we've got it covered with Microsoft licensing. And I'll admit that, you know, E5 and ATP are an improvement, but are they good enough? And I think the answer to that is no. In the area of resilience, you know, if you were hosting your own mail platform, you certainly wouldn't rely on a single email server. And of course, we've got the great Microsoft Cloud that we've leveraged to provide us with resilience. But, you know, we're still talking about a single vendor here. So, you know, when Microsoft has an issue, and I think if you're in Office 365, you've probably all experienced some outages at some point, whether it's an Exchange issue, or that's an Azure AD or MFA or any other failure that they may have caused over the last few years. There will be times where Office 365 will not be available to you. What do you do in those scenarios? And the third one that I think is key for me is backup. And again, we can unwittingly believe that we've got everything covered because we've got E3 and we've got you know, retention hold on our mailboxes or whatever it might be. The fact is we still have a single vendor, but also there are a lot of scenarios that aren't always covered. So, you know, you've got different licensing models, and maybe you haven't got an E3 for all of your mailboxes. Maybe you've got shared mailboxes, which are not going to be covered with retention policies. So there's all kinds of gaps that really do need to be filled, and that's really where we believe Mimecast can help. And so I think with that, I'm going to hand over to our guests from Mimecast. We've got Max Linscott here, and he's going to move forward from here and introduce himself.
Thank you very much, Jared. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you very much for having us to speak today. It's a real honour to be able to sit here and sit at home, as we all are, and kind of explain why our customers are choosing to have Mimecast secure their Microsoft 365. So my name is Max Linscott. I'm a Senior Product Marketing Manager at Mimecast. I've been here for 8 years, worked up through managing a variety of customers of all shapes and sizes, locations, and worked with many of our channel partners as well. So I've been able to understand sort of the evolution of Microsoft as a phenomenon within the marketplace, and our sort of fit within that world, and how we can protect that phenomenon. Speaking with me today is somebody with a huge amount more accolades than I have, and I'll let him introduce himself. JP, would you like to introduce yourself?
Greetings. It only looks that way because you made the slide, Max. So this is. So I'm an 8-time awarded Microsoft MVP, and for those that aren't aware as to what that is, it's an award that Microsoft gives to individuals who are community leaders in various technical community buckets. So my bucket was Exchange Server and then Office 365. And the reason behind the award was due to my speaking and writing over the years. I've spoken for Microsoft and others. I've written for Microsoft Press and Q and Sam's and such, and done a variety of other work. As you can see, I also co-founded 2 different companies. One is Clip Training, the other is Conversational Geek. And for the most part, for the last 5 or 6 years or so, my main focus has been on migrating from Exchange on-prem to Office 365. I think if we add it up, I've helped to move over 2 million mailboxes at this point. So I have a lot invested in the Office 365 solution, believe in it wholeheartedly, but at the same time, as has already been mentioned, there are certain gaps that have to be filled, and that's one of the reasons I'm here today.
Brilliant, thank you. So I'm going to kind of run through a few slides, and I'll be checking in with JP for his sort of view on some various things based on conversations that we've had over the years, and very much to kind of keep you guys in the loop in terms of how we're thinking about it. So just a quick snapshot of who Mimecast is. We've actually just hit 39,000 customers worldwide, with around 13 million end users being serviced from exactly the same cloud platform as each other. We managed to retain customers very well, as in they continue to see value of us. And something that we've sort of surfaced on this kind of side of the financial year was the amount of emails that we've been exposed to. And on a monthly basis, we see 66 billion, which is 2.4 billion per day, per workday. We rewrite 1 trillion URLs, and just to contextualize that, that's more than bit.ly does. Which is obviously, you know, their main function in life. So my point is that we see a huge amount of traffic and exposure, and from this we can gather a large amount of intelligence around both the email kind of environments, but also what people are doing from a web traffic perspective. So as I mentioned, today we're going to sort of try and share with you why our customers are choosing Microsoft. And as Jared said, and as sort of I've seen certainly over the last 8 years, Microsoft have increased their capabilities and they've started adding more and more features. And today they really do lead, you know, with a fantastic productivity offering. And we're not here to take any of this away. They've actually sort of doubled down to concentrate in on security because they really have to, and it is their obligation to their customers and to the rest of the world. Having said this, our business has grown exponentially as a result of Office 365, and we're going to try and articulate that for you today. So firstly, just wanted to share a few sort of talking points. The elephant in the room, or maybe perhaps it's not an elephant in the room, but with COVID-19, we've seen some interesting trends arise, and I think the best way to kind of articulate it is a sort of catalyzation of things that we thought were going to happen anyway. We've seen targeted attacks go up. We've also seen opportunistic attacks go up. With these statistics over the last 100 days of COVID, sorry, this report was created in June, so a couple of months ago. We saw massive increases in sort of basic gateway detection, or the effect that basic gateway detection was able to have. We've also seen that users are clicking on malicious URLs faster, they're opening attachments faster, and they're generally more responsive. We've seen, as Jared was saying, a huge increase in the adoption of Microsoft 365, and to use that word again, sort of catalyst. COVID-19 has meant that a lot more people are being driven away from something they've been meaning to do for a long time, where we've seen like Teams adoption go up 40% over 1 week, for example. Slack adoption's gone through the roof. So we do see that these collaboration tools are increasing all the time. Microsoft is obviously a major part of this, and we very much see it as, you know, a phenomenon and a part of the landscape. The adoption of Microsoft is sort of fairly self-explanatory. You've got either people running on-premises technologies and needing to move into the cloud. You know, you've been hearing vendors and advisors bleating about this for years and years now. But this has really acted as this sort of vessel to accelerate that move into the cloud, and as a result, a few phenomenons of its own. So, as I said, Microsoft 365 has become part of the landscape, and I think JP is probably better placed to kind of talk to the benefits of moving to 365.
Well, I mean, obviously, as you can imagine, as you look at the entire suite, it is the greatest business productivity toolkit in the history of mankind. When you think about the communication, the collaboration, the cooperation tools, OneDrive, Teams, Stream, Power Apps, Power BI, it has just grown incredibly in terms of the number of solutions and the features to those solutions. And especially during this time of COVID, Satya Nadella said within the first 2 months, he said, we've grown 2 years over 2 months because they were forced to. The growth just exploded, and they had to, of course, add to their solutions. There were things that Teams couldn't do that Zoom could, and so they started to just push to get there. And so we can see just by the numbers of people that are moving to Office 365 that everyone else has also bought into the story. I'm not the only one. It's certainly an amazing suite of solutions. They didn't just take what was on-prem and move it to the cloud. They started there, and over the last 6 or 7 years, they have really expanded that offering. I've bought into it completely, but at the same time, there's a warning there, because as you grow and as you become the de facto solution for all things cloud and so forth, at the same time, you then also become a target. You can't help but draw the attention of the bad guys in the process. And we've seen that with other solutions from Microsoft, like Windows. If everyone's using Windows, then a weakness in Windows becomes a weakness globally for everyone. So how do you mitigate that? How do you mitigate the weaknesses in Office 365? That's where, as much as I love what Office 365 offers, I'm also leery of the dangers.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also to give them full credit where credit's due, like, you know, a lot of the security capabilities that they've added in are fantastic. Like, you know, according to Gartner, the endpoint CASB, Azure ATP, MFA, and the fact that they are kind of owning a lot of that productivity and collaboration, you know, they're in the best place to secure some of those items. But when it comes to the collaboration tool, and email specifically as that kind of number one most utilized part of Microsoft 365 in general, but also the most utilized collaboration tool because of its ubiquity across the globe, and because it's the number one threat vector, it's really still being leveraged continuously to attack them and their customers. So I guess we wanted to kind of lay out this this problem that JP kind of started alluding to just now, and it's made up of sort of a series of parts. But I guess the best way to look at it is, so as JP said, they've increased hugely their user base, and even if we just look at that from a licensing perspective, which is largely how they'll report on those numbers, we've seen increased adoption follow this as well, which means that more people are using OneDrive, Teams, Slack, SharePoint, and obviously email, getting into those BI technologies as well. And so today there are around 350 million business users there or thereabouts, having, you know, rocketed from 220 million at the end of 2019. And each time Microsoft add a new user, that increases the attack surface, not only in terms of the opportunity that a hacker might see to exploit that particular user and their perhaps naivety around cybersecurity, but also those users put more demand on Microsoft in terms of scale, and in terms of feature set as well. Like, you know, we as a tech vendor understand that growing with our customers is important, and when we take on new customers, they want new things out of us. And as JP was talking around that kind of disk, that sort of CD on the side, on the left-hand side of the screen, it's important to recognize how many itches Microsoft is scratching, and thus the pressure on the development team is enormous. So not only have we seen an increased attack surface, which is sort of, if we think about that kind of, you know, melted cheese analogy, and you start to see sort of vulnerabilities appearing here, there, and everywhere, you also have this increased incentive, which makes it even harder for them to secure, particularly something like email, where it's so easy to execute an attack, because each of those users is starting to adopt and use and take advantage of all of those new collaboration tools that Microsoft are offering. Those new vulnerabilities are then being exposed even further. Not only this, they're bringing their data into Microsoft as well, which is where we kind of land on the second piece. And this is, you know, slightly ironic, because Microsoft have invested a huge amount in their security, and as I said, some of it is absolutely brilliant and market leading, and they're in the best people to be able to run that type of security. But what we see is that you have this irony between more people believing that because Microsoft have poured investment into something, and because they now if we take email as an example, they now do rewrite URLs, they do sandbox attachments, that this equates to good enough. And so you have a lot of people using exactly the same security as each other in order to protect all of their data. And if we think about Microsoft as being, a conglomerate of hundreds of business users, hundreds of millions of business users, and basically you've got this enormous gold mine being protected by exactly the same security as each other. Then you have this concept of impact and risk, or impact of breach as well. So as Jared was alluding to, a huge part of or a huge piece of the puzzle that people sadly are overlooking a lot of the time by moving to the cloud is that this resilience concept, and that ability to either stay operational when Microsoft is unavailable, or to be able to reinstate data into Microsoft when it's been corrupted or lost. And we'll get onto that in a little bit more detail shortly. But I think something that is often overlooked is that the resilience that Microsoft have built in is absolutely essential, and they have improved it enormously. But it's that notion of feeling totally helpless when Microsoft is offline and they are unavailable. And what your users are in fact going to be doing is not sitting waiting for that to sort of return to the norm. They are going to start introducing shadow IT into your midst, which is something that Microsoft are trying to eradicate altogether, which is again slightly ironic. And lastly, the amalgamation of all of these concepts brings together sort of one undoubted conclusion, which is Microsoft attracts an enormous amount of attention from cyber criminals, with purpose-built attacks being specifically designed to sidestep even their top-level protection, particularly when we look at email. So just to sort of look at a couple of pieces of data to show this as well. As I said, I've been working at Mimecast for 8 years now, and this statistic has wavered from about 92 to 97% over those 8 years, and it sort of fluctuates all the time. But it is still the #1 attack vector by a country mile. It is the most ubiquitous form of data, or most ubiquitous form of collaboration that we have in the business world. If you're going to start federating to somebody outside of your organization, you're going to initiate that conversation at the very least with email before you then perhaps migrate into a Teams or a Zoom or a Slack or whatever else it might be. And the very fact that I have to name all three of those pieces is, again, another testament to why email will not be gotten rid of quite so easily. You need an email address to log into all of the different collaboration tools that Microsoft or whoever else offers. And those notifications will come through email because, as we said, it's the most ubiquitous form of communication. So at the end of 2019, Microsoft were on 220 million business users, and they had more security features than they ever did before. And over every single month over 2019, Microsoft was the #1 spoofed brand. So this is malicious actors attempting to mimic Microsoft to target Microsoft's end users. Now, this is one specific example of how somebody might want to target a Microsoft user, but it shows you that there is a willingness to crack those locks and to go after that prize money that we described with the incentive. And it's not the only example. We saw a very similar trend when we looked at our own data. So this was pulled from our own threat intelligence reports. And we saw that over mid-2018 to mid-2019, we saw a 2.5 times increase in legitimate traffic using Microsoft Office, both in terms of the amount of web traffic that we saw and email traffic as well. Now, it's pretty straightforward for us to make the assumption that this is through increased adoption, and over that time period, I'm sure that you wouldn't challenge us on that one. So we were able to obviously use this data to assume adoption, but also looking to survey our customers and understand which of them we're using and adopting various sort of Microsoft cloud platforms. Now, over that period, we saw a 7,500 times increase in attacks that we blocked that contained Microsoft Office as a term, which is, a staggering correlation between the two. Now, admittedly, this is an extreme example because it's a webinar and we're trying to illustrate a point. But I think that it's, this specific example was during a time period, for those of you who remember, where Microsoft Forms was being abused to basically target people, and the way in which it was being abused was obviously it's a surveying tool, and basically the malicious actor would create a survey with 2 questions that was designed to look like a Microsoft portal, and the questions would be, enter your username and enter your password. So this attack was leveraged for an extensive amount of time during that year's period, and since then the vulnerability has been closed. But again, it shows you how often that kind of vulnerability or the damage that a vulnerability that Microsoft might have can be exploited and will be hunted after by malicious actors. And without wishing to overlabor the point, we have seen a very similar correlation to a slightly lesser extreme with both SharePoint traffic and OneDrive traffic as well. So I was going to sort of hand back to JP quickly to talk through a particular sort of attack that he's seen, but I've been tracking a lot of cyber threats that have come through, and by sort of a large proportion, most of them are angled at Microsoft users. Even today, I've read an article that said that over 600 businesses were targeted by a specific Microsoft threat that came through. So JP, you were explaining an attack that we saw the other day.
So I had a situation where I was reached out to, I think it was because of my writing for InfoWorld. So someone saw that I had written quite a bit on malware and ransomware, and they reached out because their hospital had been the victim of an attack, a malware ransomware attack. And so I asked the question, I said, well, what platform are you using? They were using Office 365. The admin on the line was nearly in tears. Apparently, one of the doctor's laptops had gotten infected, and there was information on the laptop. And we talked about what are some of the other options. Whatever research, can he just redo the research? Well, no, it's very important. I said, okay. And I said, do you have any backups of it? Well, no, we have no backups of that. They didn't have their documents going to a server and then backing up the server, anything like that. So I said, okay, all right. I said, and they said, well, what do we do? I said, well, you might have to pay the ransom if it's that important. And they said, well, you always say don't pay the ransom. And that's true. In my articles, I would lead that way. I would lean toward that. But I said, yes, but read the rest of the article. The rest of the article says, in order to avoid having to pay a ransom, there are things you need to put in place to mitigate these types of attacks. I said, I'm a big believer in defense in depth, for one. So making sure your gateway is secure, as you just mentioned, Max, you have, if 90+% of all attacks start with email, then certainly we would want to focus on making sure our gateway is secure. Having layered approaches to that would be the smartest move. But then the other thing that a lot of folks don't realize is Office 365 is not backed up, email specifically. There's no backup window large enough. So Microsoft, they never promise to back it up. If you look at the SLAs, they're not duplicitous here. They say very clearly, we do not give you a point-in-time restoration for your Exchange data. So if you need that, then you would need to look to a third-party solution. So obviously, in the case of in the case of this ransomware attack, they had to figure out what they would do. But there are other types of attacks that actually affect the mailbox itself. These are even more so a reason to have some type of sync and recover solution or backup recovery solution. An attack type where someone opts in. So they actually choose through an email that comes in, they say, we're gonna let you have control of certain features of my mailbox. And that's very dangerous, because when a user does that, well, even Microsoft doesn't have a way to intervene. Once that mailbox is now, the permissions are given to someone else, they can encrypt the mailbox. And ultimately, Microsoft says, we can help you after you pay the ransom and get your control of your data back, but they can't help you otherwise. The data is encrypted. The only solution otherwise is to start up a new mailbox and restore from a backup. But again, there is no backup from the Microsoft side. So this is where I just try to encourage folks to try to look at the whole picture here. Look at where there might be gaps, whether it's from the security perspective, email, a huge threat, putting something there to improve your posture and your strength. And then also looking down the cyber kill chain all the way down to the end user, the training that you give them. If we look at the whole thing, we can see where there are gaps, and we want to fill those gaps because obviously, as you said, Microsoft is focused on a lot of different things, and it's impossible for them to be all things to all people. So for each individual organization, and as you can see with some of these headlines, that story I told, it's not the only organization to have that situation come their way. Many others have been victimized. And now in the case of that one gap with the ransomware attack, it took Microsoft 5 hours to close the gap. And they thought they responded. I interviewed them afterwards, and they thought that they responded as quickly as possible. They were happy with their response. And I won't begrudge them that. But at the same time, for the hospital that got hit with the attack, they weren't too thrilled with it. So this is where every organization needs to do their best to avoid that type of an attack. Because what does it mean on the back end? It means sometimes employee data or company or customer data has been released. It means that now somebody has to take the fall for it. So sometimes C-level folks are asked to leave as a result of these types of attacks. The damage to the reputation, your reputational damage over these types of attacks, all of that has to be thought out to see how can we avoid these types of problems. So
absolutely, yeah, I think that like we can't say it enough, and we think that Microsoft has got us so much to offer, and a lot of it comes in the security area. But I think it's our responsibility to make sure that people are going into it with open eyes, and that they have the opportunity to rationalize those risks themselves and ultimately double up where they need to, and figure out where they can sort of save some complexity elsewhere. So as we've kind of hopefully articulated, Microsoft is under a huge amount of attack, and I think from an email perspective, with it being the #1 threat vector and it being the sort of most ubiquitous form of communication, as we said, and being leveraged in almost every single cyber attack, it's unsurprising that they're unable to perform to an efficacious level from a security perspective. To describe what these statistics are that you're seeing on the screen now, Mimecast runs an email security risk assessment. Now, this is where we sit behind the sort of incumbent email security provider. We journal the data, the emails that are delivered by Microsoft EOP plus ATP in this example, and push it through Mimecast security to understand how many of these emails that have been delivered by Microsoft should not have been delivered. And with EOP and ATP over 2019, we found that across 35,000 users, 28% of the emails should not have been delivered. Now, of course, the lion's share of that is going to be spam, but equally, like that is representing a massive impact from a productivity perspective, but embedded within that spam is then the needles within the haystacks, and you obviously have this sort of continuum of emails that we're all trying to protect you from and stop, from the kind of high volume, low impact, low effort from the attacker's perspective to the low volume, high impact and highly targeted emails at the other end of the spectrum. And by getting hit by one of those and 100 of the other, you can cause a lot of damage over the course of however long it takes you to receive that amount of emails. And just to kind of sort of further back that up, we've seen that we're not the only ones who are seeing that Microsoft is perhaps not up to the task when it comes to email from a protection perspective. We've tested ourselves against Microsoft using third parties. We've reviewed with analysts to understand what it is that they think and what the market's saying. And we've asked customers as well. And again, we wanted to relay to you sort of the risks that our customers are seeing and why they see a huge amount of value in doubling down on their security from an email perspective. So just to summarize, and I'm conscious of time here, email is the most universal business tool. It's the most essential part of Microsoft 365, no matter how many times people predict that we're going to move in some sort of mass exodus onto a single IM platform or whatever it is, because currently the trends still illustrate that it's spiking. Unsurprisingly, as a result, it remains the #1 attack vector, with 94% of attacks starting with email. Microsoft 365 adoption makes both them and their customers the #1 target for cyber criminals because of that increased attack surface and increased incentive to go after them. So sadly, from an email perspective, despite Microsoft's improved security, the cyber criminals are proving themselves up to the challenge. They are simply too overwhelming a force to be reckoned with. So we wanted to try and rationalize sort of these email threats as they're sort of as we see them, and introduce, like, you know, perhaps it isn't simply about like a more effective perimeter all the time. There is many different elements to this. So email, as we said, remains the #1 attack vector. This is just one example of how people are sort of exploiting email to attack clients. And we see that there's a huge amount of money in business email compromise, as you may be aware, sort of the stats from the FBI. And I think the worrying thing about this stat is that this is based on reported versions of this, whereas it's very likely that we only really know half the story, and there's a lot of people who aren't reporting attacks that they see come through. 222 unique Microsoft phishing URLs created every day over 2019. This is giving you, again, an example of how much malicious actors love targeting and hunting Microsoft business. It really is a frightening statistic. And when we sort of go on to talk about where Mimecast adds value over the sort of ATP solution, that ability to scan URLs live really comes into its own when you're kind of dealing with that many ones that have never been seen before. Then we actually realized that this is a multi-dimensional problem. We have two other areas where we're seeing sort of problems with email. Firstly, we see that a huge amount of data leaks and breaches are caused by careless employees. Think about if they're clicking on 100% of the links that they receive, then they are going to, your security technology is going to fail at some point. So by looking to strengthen those end users and improve their kind of behaviors, we can obviously start to reduce down that risk significantly. On the other side of things, even Microsoft Docs kind of talk about this as a phenomenon, and this is where you can essentially, as a cyber criminal, amplify the impact of your attack, because you've got employees spreading malicious content internally via email. When you look at sort of the Microsoft Docs, they say, look, everybody's trying to get Microsoft credentials, and the first thing that they do if they do start compromising mailbox is that they will spread the same kind of URL, for example, out to the internal DLs within the organization. Then we see this comparatively new phenomenon, but it will make perfect sense when I describe it. So we see that most enterprises have experienced the spoofing or impersonation of business partners or vendors. So this is something that is often considered out of one's control. So to put it into real life example, imagine that Microsoft is impersonated by a malicious actor, and they they've created a fake domain, or they've created a fake Microsoft portal, and they've then targeted Microsoft customers. This is happening at all ends of the kind of spectrum, affecting both customers, larger vendors like Microsoft, but up and down the chain, and it will always be it will become increasingly more pervasive as a threat. So again, to summarize, we see this in terms of just trying to sort of rationalize this down into some mildly controllable set of problems. there is too much spam and targeted attack coming through the gateway. 28% is a huge number, and it creates a massive amount of risk across your organization. If they're performing endpoint to the level that Gartner claim they are, if they're performing CASB to the level that they're also claiming, you're still letting through an enormous amount of traffic that should not be let through the front door. And 28%, given that 94% of attacks start with email, is far, far too great a number. You have your users behaving poorly, increasing the risk that you're sort of experiencing or seeing at that email level. So by looking to address that behavior, you can make a big difference. You see internal compromise and lateral spread amplifying the impact of an attack as well. And then you start to see these brand exploits. So you see your web portals being impersonated, your web pages being impersonated, your email domain being spoofed, which is obviously the sort of something that DMARC would look at addressing and helping with. And then obviously, depending on somebody's situation, you have often got people with a sort of variety of security solutions representing their security ecosystem, which have been bought in as part of a sort of strategy that was curated a while ago to where they are today. And ultimately, something that a lot of organizations are trying to solve is getting each of these to talk to each other, to automate, simplify, and enrich each other so that they can be more resilient as a whole. And this is where Mimecast looks to come in with our email security 3.0 strategy. We provide a secure email gateway that gives market-leading efficacy with enhanced threat detection that JP will kind of talk through a little bit about why it's sort of advantageous to use that versus simply relying on Microsoft's offering. We have awareness training that has award-winning content, the ability to coordinate between both the security solution and the awareness training, so that if you realize that a human or one of your users is creating a risk, then that risk can be translated back into the security side of things, so you can look to enforce stronger policies against them. And vice versa, if you realize that somebody's being targeted by the intelligence of your secure email gateway, you can look to increase that person's training. We can use real life threats in our new SafePhish product as well. Next to this, we have Internal Email Protect, which looks at applying deep level scanning on all east to west traffic so that we can look at capturing malicious content as it traverses across your organization and look to cut out those issues of compromise, as well as looking at externally bound traffic as well. We recently acquired two companies, DMARC Analyzer and Brand Exploit Protect. And because we offer these all from an integrated platform, again, we're able to make sure that we can build this strategy where we've got the ability to help you enforce DMARC, become DMARC compliant, monitor all your domain usage. And Brand Exploit Protect allows you to, is made up of sort of three core elements, where we have proactive intelligence, where we're looking to monitor quadrillions of web domains using AI and machine learning to hunt down any examples where your website or portal is being impersonated, married with a web agent that sits on your website looking to detect any malicious activity like cloning. And then rapid takedown services, which can often take down a malicious website within minutes. Lastly, because it was built on an integrated platform and built in the cloud from its conception, it is basically constructed with an open API. So we have surfaced this to customers so that your partners, your own developers can start to integrate Mimecast intelligence with the rest of your security ecosystem. We've recently become available on Azure Marketplace. So if you choose that kind of reduced complexity version of events and you want to look at feeding intelligence from Mimecast into Microsoft, then you can absolutely take advantage of that, and vice versa. We also have pre-configured integrations with CrowdStrike, Rapid7, Logarithm, and all of the big security vendors that you may or may not be using. So I'm going to hand over to JP quickly, and I'm very conscious of time. So just to sort of call out a couple of other areas where Mimecast has an advantage.
So I think it's important to look at things that Microsoft, first of all, doesn't do at all, and they don't even promise to do some of these things. I'll give you an example. So Mimecast has a solution called static file analysis. And what this does is when a document comes in, and obviously looking for ransomware and malware and such, the Mimecast solution will scan the document. It will look at the bits and the bytes, the zeros and the ones, and it's looking for executable code. I think about it. If it was an image document, should there be any executable code? Obviously not. So it can very quickly scan the document. It doesn't have to put it through a sandbox for this. It scans the document, and it's file agnostic. And ultimately, whether it's an image, a PDF, a Word doc, it's going to look for executable code. That's just something that Microsoft doesn't offer. Now, what do they offer? Well, they do offer a sandboxing solution. It's a software emulated sandbox. It uses an Azure VM. We don't know a lot beyond that. Even MVPs are not privy to what's going on behind the curtain. But we assume that they're using AV signatures, perhaps heuristics and such, to try to weed out malicious or weaponized attachments. But we don't know much about it. What we do know is that typically with a software emulated VM, you don't get the same efficacy as you do with a hardware emulated VM for a sandboxing solution. Most enterprise grade organizations that do security will use a hardware emulated VM because when malware looks to, when it opens in a sandbox, if it can detect that it's in a sandbox, it remains dormant. As opposed to if it is not able to detect it, if it's closer to the bare metal there, and if it feels like it's running on a real system, it'll detonate. So we think that features help to explain the efficacy. Sometimes when we look at the efficacy numbers and we say, why is it Mimecast performs better in these areas? It's probably because Microsoft's solution is using techniques that are not as effective. And so this is one example where the sandbox that Microsoft uses is not necessarily as effective in terms of how it's designed as a hardware emulated sandbox would be. So take those two together. Just if you think about malware and ransomware being a big concern, having a solution like static file analysis along with a solid enterprise grade sandboxing solution combined together, that's valuable. That's where Mimecast adds real value to the story. I'll just talk about one other here that I think is important, DMARC Analyzer. You mentioned it in the last slide as far as that being something that Mimecast has added to its portfolio. What I see is a lot of organizations, they'll enable SPF. They might even go so far as to enable DKIM, although that seems to be still missing from a lot of organizations. It's a little bit harder to do. You have to go in, especially in Office 365, you have to do a remote PowerShell connection and set up the public-private key encryption and such, but it's worth it. But then you have DMARC, and it's not necessarily difficult to set up DMARC in terms of putting in a DNS record, but without an analyzer on the back end, without something that pulls in the reports, without something that can give you back some data, it's somewhat worthless. And that's where, again, Microsoft does not do that. In fact, in their documentation, they'll tell you how to set up SPF, how to enable DKIM, and get everything into your DNS records and such. And then when it comes to DMARC, they say, for third-party solutions that you need to, they'll give you a list of solutions that you can use to get the reporting. They don't do that. So I think that's where, again, Microsoft has a great solution. It's got this incredible suite, but it requires enhancement. And that's where Mimecast looks to enhance that story across all of these different pieces, all those different zones that you mentioned. Max, I'll turn it back over to you. I think there's a couple of other things you'd like to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, we can definitely look to follow up with anybody who's interested in sort of looking at these various things. But I think, like you were saying, the 28% gets explained here with both, our maniacal focus on innovation and strategy. Like, we've curated a platform where we've delivered a lot of homegrown technologies and recently started acquiring a few as well, which have been wrapped in and been able to feed their intelligence back to increase our efficacy further. For example, we've recently acquired Message Control, which looks to apply AI and machine learning for any anomalous kind of behaviors to further enhance that ability to detect suspicious activity. As you said, I think there's a couple of other bits that we want to cover off before we hit the hour mark here. So You touched on sort of an important part that we believe that we deliver for organizations. And the problem that we're looking at here is that total dependency on a single provider. I won't sort of ham this up too much because I feel that your story around the ransomware did quite a nice job of that. But there's two kind of core elements to this. And this is looking at that kind of email continuity and that ability to keep email up and running. Like, what actually happens when this is unavailable? What do we really think that our users are doing in this scenario? Because certainly at Mimecast, you know, we would all want to continue doing our jobs to the best of our ability and go hang Microsoft if, you know, suddenly Exchange is unavailable. And then the other piece is, what happens if that ransomware attack hits? What happens if my administrator makes an error and corrupts or loses a file? Recently, I discovered that you can actually edit an email that you've already received, and that will rewrite it back to the Microsoft server, which completely undermines, you know, whatever you would have it backed up, whatever Microsoft backup there would be. We touched on shadow IT here. Like, how do we fully understand what our users are doing within their kind of web activities, and how do we control what they're looking at and start to secure their web behaviors? And lastly, the kind of legal and compliance side of things. Now, I think it's important just to dive into this in a tiny bit of depth in the last 5 minutes. But with Microsoft, we've sort of read through various analyst reports, we've spoken to customers, and something that I find quite alarming about what they've said is that they've reported sort of fairly slow and inaccurate search results. Now, I know for a fact that Microsoft have an excellent e-discovery service, and that's great. But the problem is that it's a little bit flawed, because you're searching Exchange, which was never designed to be an e-discovery service. It was designed to be a post office. Now you get a huge amount of storage with it. And yes, you get litigation holds. But what happens when you want to remediate a malicious email that Microsoft has delivered from your Exchange server and it's on litigation hold? It means that you have to take it off litigation hold and you have to remediate that email, which sort of undermines the ability for it to be immutable at that point, and thus for you to have confidence in your compliance solution without leveraging a third party that gives you an independent and immutable source of data. So again, like Mimecast looks to provide independent email continuity with 100% email continuity SLA. We have a compliant and secure cloud-to-cloud backup provided by our archive. The cool thing about this is, again, it's integrated with our security. So when we remediate an email from your Office 365, we'll also make sure that your users are safe from it as well. So in the scenario that you're backing up into Office 365 because that data has been corrupted, your users will be kept safe from anything that should be remediated. And a lot of the time, people are trying to solve these two problems with point solutions, and they miss out on that vulnerability and actually end up reintroducing risk into their organization. We have a web security solution that looks to proxy and monitor web threats and make sure that your users are kept safe online. It also enables you to look at a degree of app control and visibility, where you can start to understand, you know, what part shadow IT does actually play within your organization. And then we have an archive that is a 6-time Gartner Enterprise Information Archive winner. It's been architected and indexed right from the beginning, and we collect the data at the point that it gets delivered, which means that it can be immutable. It's accurate and rapid from a search perspective because of those pieces of functionality, and the retention management can then be performed against it to make sure that you comply with GDPR, for example, with a huge amount of advanced capabilities like random sampling and etc., based on the capabilities that you acquire from a financial perspective, for example. So over the last sort of few years, we've matured our email security solution from looking at the perimeter. We introduced IEP, or internal email protect, awareness training, to then include brand protection and DMARC. And together, we've been able to create this solution where we have email security 3.0 on the left-hand side, and a series of resilience extensions which are designed to add value to Microsoft. And because it's delivered from exactly the same platform as each other, and because all of these are integrated and intelligent of one another, we're able to deliver threat intelligence and ecosystem APIs that can plug in and enhance and enrich your current platform and infrastructure with every single one of these packages. Again, I'm very conscious of time now, so I'm going to finish there and ask Jared to sort of co-host again and take any questions that might be coming up.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Max and JP. That's been a really great presentation. I think we're running out of time now, so we haven't had any questions come in yet. So what I think we will probably do is we will wrap up for today. But what we are going to do is we will send out the slides and a recording of the presentation as well. And if you have any questions, please do come back to us, and we'll be glad to help you out and answer anything that you need to ask. But thank you again for attending, and thank you all, JP and Max, for presenting as well.
Pleasure. Great. Thanks for having us.
Okay. Thanks all. Have a great day.